Inktober day 3 has arrived, and today we're doing a little walkthrough of my version of the prompt, which is path. You can catch the other days if you check the description. I've done dream and spider, both very fantasy sort of prompts, but I managed to put them back into my version of sketching using urban and rural scenes in a slightly different way. Catch those videos down below, like I said. But otherwise, let's just crack on today and let's see how we can use ink to come up with something fun, quick, easy for Inktober day 3 path. For this sketch, I'm going to be using a couple of different things. I've got a water brush, which you know therefore means I've got some water soluble ink, as well as at the beginning using some waterproof ink, which is my normal carbon platinum ink. And with that, we're ready to dive in, have some fun and relax on day 3 of Inktober. After the last couple of days of fantasy themed prompts, I'm going to take today rather more literally. And I've got this path. This is from the O-Trek in Patagonia, in Chile. And what we're going to do is we're going to sketch this path, which has been laid out through a wood which got burnt, I think burnt by people lighting a illegal fire, unfortunately. But they sort of left it and have these boards up around this area as a kind of memorandum, something like that, to basically last as be treated as a learning point, I guess. And we're going to sort of expand on that with our own version. So first thing we've got, and this is what anchors our whole scene, is this boardwalk, of course. And the factor of this boardwalk which makes it really catch your eye is the kind of the perspective. So I'm going to exaggerate that perspective as we disappear off into the distance. And that's also going to let me kind of shorten the path. So the path isn't going all the way up into the middle of our scene. And then it can disappear off over here. So now we've got this path in, and all I did was at the beginning we got horizontal lines where we're implying quite a bit of shape, and as we go off distantly we are just having horizontal lines, and for me that builds up enough of an impression of what's going on that we kind of get the scene. For me it works, just something as simple as that. May not be for you, maybe that you want to be neater and you want to be more specific about exactly where these boardwalk areas are going, keeping the exact dimensions and things, or getting more of that top-down perspective. But I've shortened it, brought the view down a little bit so that we can create more of a scene looking up at all of these trees. And so that is where I'm going to go next, is all these trees. And I say all of them, but of course I'm not going to do all of them, but we're going to do a few. And this is where I'm certainly not going to copy the trees, but there are some features of trees which I think are really sort of, important to get in, interesting to get in, striking, that's what I was after. So just sort of half copying, half being inspired by, especially at the front, we'll be a little bit more accurate with how we're defining our trees. But as we go back, we're just getting more just the idea of all these sort of scratchy lines coming in. Again, at this side, we'll just sort of get the idea of some of these trees, trying to be a little bit, not realistic, but vaguely true to what we see. Get the idea of these overlaps as well. And there's a couple of trees maybe just coming in at the side. And all of this, by the way, I'm doing with carbon black ink, platinum ink, which is waterproof. So that means that we can have some fun with other things later on, and we will of course have some fun with other things later on. In the background we've got a few sort of bushes and things here. Perhaps it's heather, I'm not sure, but something like that. Certainly in the UK we'd be looking at heather at the sides here, and then closer in we've got the idea of some grass. So perhaps just some simple hatching, little dotty hatching, just to get that feel of grass. So this way we've got different areas, different textures, gradually building up. And there we go. Now in the middle area we've got these kind of trees, which are actually very short in our sort of view, aren't they? So they're the same as these trees, but because of the way that perspective works, they are much lower. They're not anywhere near as high as these trees that are up close. It's still good to have some variety, so I've got lots of basically hatched trees there. But then as we sort of build up the textures, just get in some more sort of those branches. And you might have just heard Betty has awoken, clearly very excited by the prospect of variation in our trees, which just goes to show that you too should be excited by varied lines and all of that. And that's why Inktober is so much fun. Even my dog is excited by it so much that she's woken up. So all I'm doing, building up a little idea here. Now this is where I'm going to just swap over instruments and start to have a bit of fun with some water. So we've got this mountain in the distance. So what I'm going to do is do a very light bit of hatching. This will be hopefully light enough not to take over those trees, and we'll then be able to take that ink and basically just wash it up. And with this is a water brush, so I can actually just drop loads of water on and then use that to create that kind of misty feel. Hopefully that's the aim, get that kind of misty feel of that mountain disappearing up. And then we can come back in, and we have got areas of this mountain which are more well defined, so we can actually come in and scribble some ink in wet on wet style to get that darker area. And the darker area is quite marked in how it comes down, and it just stops. Because of all these white burnt out trees, it kind of just stops at the top of these trees. Then off to one side, we've actually got a few areas which we can quite clearly see the shape of the mountain, and then it kind of stops again. So we'll get that sharp edge, and then we'll just soften it in a few places. And we've got the same out on this side as well, so we can get that sharp edge. This time we can actually get it mostly wet on wet. And hopefully now we've got the idea of this disappearing mountain going off into the background. Everything else in the background is actually very light, very white. What we can do now is we can actually be very cheeky and just paint with our ink. So if we want, we can take a little bit of ink out of here and literally use it to just paint. People ask, does this damage your pen? And I have never damaged a pen doing this. And I would suggest that doing this with a very soft brush is much less likely to damage your pen than, say, drawing with it, where you're drawing onto a hard surface. So I've always felt safe doing this, but I understand if you don't feel as safe doing this with your pen. But I think it's a really lovely technique to get that ink down without the necessary need to have the line work. Now we can do the same, little bit of fun in here as well. So if I just load the page, bit of ink, identify that there are deep shadows and there are bright reflections. Now we can bring across that idea of shadow and reflection. Get a little bit of extra something going on the front of our path here. Now I'm going to continue just working with this pen to get a little bit more texture. This is where we could actually get really specific. We could get really specific with our water soluble ink and create lots of very specific textures. So here, this plant, which hopefully someone will tell me what it is, and I'm going to keep calling it heather, although I imagine it is not heather. And I could just create the textures on top, a little bit of wet on wet still, but creating those textures, lots of little scraggly kind of lines and leaves. Do the same over here. What we can then do is, because this makes it very busy, what we can then do is take these kind of little scraggly marks and we can soften them again with our brush pen. And having softened them like that, what we will hopefully find is we're left with the loose texture, but a lot of just value-based sort of sketching. So here we just come in, soften a few, just with a little bit of water. And it'll leave some of the scratchy marks, and it will leave some of the just impressions on the page. And we can soften the edges as well, bring that down. And there we go. And looking up, I might just, now that this is a bit more dry, bring down a more specific edge on top of where these trees are. So we said that the white trees leave a nice white area. So again, using our lovely techniques, we can do a bit of wet on wet, slightly less wet now. So I'm able to lay down a bit more ink and with that able to just make some more marked contrasts, leaving again some of these sort of trees which are coming over the top. We want them to be white, don't we? So we'll have them being white, coming in, coming up like this, and this one coming up, and just soften all those marks. And again, maybe a few places you can just do the same in here. What you might find when you do wet on wet stuff like this is, especially with very fine pens, this is actually a medium nib, so it's doing quite well. With very fine pens, the ink might all get taken out of the ink flow of your pen, so you might actually find that your pen intermittently dries up. And that's okay, that's not the pen getting damaged, that's just the ink, all the ink being absorbed onto your page. And you just need to take it onto another part of your page or somewhere else, give it a few scribbles, and you should be back in business. Okay, having done that, sort of building up these values quite nicely, I think we need a bit more texture into these trees. So I'm going to get these distant trees to just pop a little bit more. And we'll get some wet on wet where they're mingling, but that's okay. But I kind of want that so we don't have these two separate kind of feeling areas. And then some of these trees in the front we can have a play with. And you could continue with the same thing. I might just have a go here with one of my favourite tools, which is a brush pen, or a few day pen would be another good idea for this. And here we can get quite expressive, bold trees now, hopefully just jumping forward in front of all this other ink. We want them to still feel white, so we want some of those lines to stay, but we also want these bold marks. And this is where, you know, just have a play with different tools that you have. There's lots of different ways of putting ink on a page. There's lots of different nibs for fountain pens. There's lots of different dippy pens, which are really cheap and easy to play with and have a lot of versatility. You can even create your own nibs out of scratching with a stick, which is something that I've done on this channel before. It actually works really, really well. Perhaps that's something, if you all want, if I get people asking for it, perhaps that's something that we can do again in Inktober. Here we go. We can enhance a few of the shadows with this very bold pen. A few more just textures. And we can move that around again to enhance and soften and just create that lovely bold image. And the aim of this isn't to create something perfect. I've been going about just over 10 minutes, and that is pretty much as long as I want to spend on any of these Inktober prompts, unless one really catches my eye and I want to play with it a lot. This is about having a bit of fun, exploring, challenging yourself. So even creating an image like this is very different from what I normally do. So it's definitely a challenge, and you know, maybe you're going to say it's not as good as normal, or maybe you say my stuff's never good. You know, all opinions valid, as they say. But it's certainly a good way to expand your horizons and find things you didn't know you would enjoy. And hopefully that's what we'll all do if we want to take part. If we don't want to take part, that's also okay. There shouldn't be any pressure. I did a silly little graph which I can put up now if I remember when I edit this, about sort of inspiration and stress and how, you know, they can be linked. So sometimes we get all this inspiration, makes us feel like we really need to go out and try loads and loads of stuff, but that doesn't help us, because actually we're just getting stressed by the need, or the perceived need, to go and do loads of things. And it can be easier just to take a break and give yourself a break. And just like that, I think if I do some splashes just to fill up that background. Oh, I'm having a bit of trouble splashing with that pen. Let's try again. There we go, a few bits of splashes to just fill up, give it a bit of extra texture. Maybe use some of the ink that's on my water brush just to create a few more little branches. And there we go, so we sort of layered up this image with a few different pens, lots of water, and that is my path. So for Inktober day 3, hashtag path, hashtag Inktober. Now let me know what you're doing, share it on Instagram, in the comments, Tell me what you've decided to do for Path. Have you done it literally like me, or are you going to go abstract and a bit crazy? In which case, I'd be really interested to hear about it and see it if you want to share it with me. Thanks for watching. Catch the other Inktober videos in the links below in the description, and I'll see you hopefully tomorrow. So thank you everyone for watching my little sketching videos. If you enjoy my content, please do subscribe to my channel because it makes me really, really happy. Thanks again.